We are doing Extra Life again this year, where you can mash buttons, roll dice, play games, and help kids along the way. I hope you'll be a part of that with us. Stick around after the video for more information. Alright, well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about Kill Switch? Stick around and find out. There's no theme music for first-person shooters. I was trying to figure out, I was thinking at one point of doing like some kind of crazy intro where I like get my boys' guns and bend over backwards and try to give you like a first-person shooter type experience, but that became a whole lot more work than it was worth. So you just get this. I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions, here with my uncut review of Kill Switch. The IMDb synopsis reads, a pilot battles to save his family after the family and the planet after an experiment for unlimited energy goes wrong. And that's all they say. There's I guess, well, that's pretty fair, actually. There's not a whole lot more to it than that, and what there is, anyway. So let me talk a little bit about what this animal is, as far as like the story, the script, the pacing, and the tone of it. Action sci-fi. The main premise of the movie involves the hero entering a parallel Earth to fix something that went horribly wrong with this experiment, this energy experiment that he is associated with because he works for this big kind of conglomerate or technology company that's promising to bring self-sustaining energy to the entire planet and just solve our energy problem once and for all. And so that involves parallel Earths somehow, and they explain, in the movie why it involves a parallel Earth. And so he goes to this parallel Earth to try and fix this problem. He's running into parallel versions of people that he knows, and he has to fight and survive in a version of Earth that's much more hostile and dangerous than his own. And so, this is it's not too. You've seen probably a lot of parallel reality stories before, and like, oh, you're different here than you were back home, and all that kind of stuff. It's not really about that. It's not so much about like, oh, how is this person different from the way we knew them in the regular world. It's more about really kind of the world itself and why it's there and the fate of that world and just kind of like some major things hanging in the balance and stuff. But that said, it's not a really emotionally engaging story. It wasn't for me anyway. Maybe it will be for you, but it wasn't for me. It's near future sci-fi, so it doesn't feel like crazy futuristic. But there's plenty of sci-fi gadgets and weapons, including giant law enforcement drones, which a decade or two ago would have felt a lot more sci-fi than it does now. But, these drones are a lot more common, and so just imagining bigger ones with lots more guns on them isn't too crazy to think about. So anyway, there's lots of, and these giant law enforcement drones are kind of like a primary antagonist for the hero and for those that are with him, and it makes for some cool action spectacle. There are some character behaviors that don't make sense to me. The hero, he knows that he's interacting with alternative versions of people that he knows, and yet sometimes he treats them as though they are one and the same person. Like one example would be that he blames a mirror version of someone he runs into for something that the original version back in his world did, and I'm like, and then he's going and looking for people as though he has an attachment to them, and I'm like, well, these aren't the ones that you like. These aren't the family members that you knew and loved and stuff. They're back home, and you understand that. You're talking about these people as though they're all copies. So why are you kind of invested in some of these people as though they're the people back home, or treating them as though they are one and the same with the people back home? It's a little bit unusual in terms of like, I'm trying to figure out what's going on in the main character's mind. What's his thinking here? They also could have taken in the story one or two great twists or turns, or gone with a more creative and unexpected ending, but it's just not that kind of story. In fact, in the second half, it just kind of felt like things were happening. Action sequences were happening, but the story really wasn't moving forward. The main story is told through the first-person perspective of the hero, and it borrows a lot from first-person video games like Far Cry and BioShock. I think of those specifically because they allow for a bumpier camera for the player, for the first-person perspective, and are more about player immersion rather than kind of smooth shooting in some of the more arcadey, competitive multiplayer type of shooters. There's lots of there's video gamey type HUDs. I mean, he's evidently wearing some kind of a suit or has some kind of a setup whenever he's in the first person mode, and that's why they're doing that. But it shows like his current health condition, and shows things that he maybe should consider interacting with in the environment that he's moving around in. So there are little object cues for that, which you see in video games. There's a sequence with a vehicle mounted weapon, where someone says, you take the wheel, I'll take the gun. So he goes and his buddy drives the car and he gets the gun out, and it's like, okay, I mean, we've seen we've seen all this before. It's and even down to like the rotate and look at my new weapon. You know how in some first-person shooters, if you play them, when you get a new weapon, what's the first thing that the hand does? It like rotates it from side to side, and then it gets it into its ready-to-use position. And I kid you not, he picks up a weapon at one point, and he's like, rotate, look at this side, ready to go. The main story is broken up by, which is told in that first-person perspective, is broken up by frequent and lengthy third-person flashbacks, to the point where I almost don't want to call them flashbacks. I almost want to call it, like a, non-linear storytelling, which arguably you could. But anyway, there are these third-person flashbacks where you see him, the main hero, not just hear his voice like in the first-person sequences. You see him interacting with his family and understanding more about, how he came to work for this company, and kind of what some of his motives are, what he cares about in life, and it all takes place, before this disaster and this journey of his into the parallel world. And I thought that eventually those flashback sequences would connect more strongly to the story in the parallel world and the solution to that problem or something like that. But they ended up being really just more about developing the hero's motivation for what is his final choice during the climax. So the story, just to sum it up, was nothing special to me, and I felt about as attached to it as I would to the typical first-person shooter video game, story. Okay, so the cast is led by Dan Stevens. Let me see. Here we go. Dan Stevens, and you might know him. Well, you might not know him. Your significant other might know them from Downton Abbey, where he was Matthew, until he was no longer on that show because he wanted to be a movie star, I think. So here he is being a movie star, and he's actually, becoming more and more of a face in movies all the time. I've noticed he was in Colossal. He played didn't he play one of the boyfriends or something? He's in the upcoming The Man Who Invented Christmas about Charles Dickens. He was the Beast in Beauty and the Beast, and so he's making the rounds. And but this was, this little small, presumably small, I'm not sure of the budget actually, small or foreign, I'm not sure, sci-fi movie where he gets to branch out and do an American accent and stuff like that. So anyway, he's the most recognizable face to me and probably to most people in this movie. He does a good American accent, and he does a good job with the performance. There wasn't a ton in the script really to work with, I don't think. No big complaints about the rest of the cast either, but no standout performances to me, at the same time. So, moving on to stunts and visuals. Okay, this is really the reason to watch the movie. Now, normally I'm not going to really give much credit at all to movies that are just eye candy. Because for me, I'm cursed with an eye that can just pick out CG, and it's like, well, there's some more cartoons I'm looking at, it amounts to not quite the same thing, but I'm just cursed. I can just see CG and it takes me out of a movie, so I just kind of have to accept it, So like a movie that has lots of CG, like what was that sci-fi movie, something Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets? There was CG all over the place, but I was bored out of my mind. This one is different, even though I would say that the visuals are a main draw to it because of the shooting style. That first-person style of shooting is still a novelty. We've only seen so far, I think, Hardcore Henry is the other big movie that would come to mind, and this one's certainly not big in terms of its release in theaters in the U.S. But not many movies have used this kind of device, this little novelty, and so it's still kind of like, a novelty. It hasn't become like this boring thing that maybe it will be someday. And so that's interesting to me. And also the fact that, when you have a bumpier first-person camera like that, for me, it made some of the moments that happened more surprising than, it would if there was an established shot that was like, okay, sometimes you can tell when someone's about to turn around and run into the bad guy, or there's about to be an explosion in the background of the scene. You couldn't really predict that. I couldn't anyway, as well, because of this bumpy first-person camera. And so there was sudden moments that would happen that would catch me off guard that I think in a more traditionally shot movie would not have caught me off guard. So I was more engaged in the moment-to-moment action and what was happening to the characters, and the surprises were affecting me more, I think, because of the way that it was shot. I should also say that for me, the visual effects look really solid for a movie that, as I said, didn't make much of an appearance in U.S. theaters, which usually indicates to me it's either a foreign movie or a smaller budget movie, and in either case, those types of movies often don't have the kinds of visual effects resources that, like, say, a standard, big blockbuster Hollywood movie would have. But it's neat to see kind of what those types of movies are able to do with special effects technology being where it is today, much more accessible, and I think in many ways less expensive. And so there was still lots of crazy large-scale destruction and sci-fi vehicles and weapons and stuff, and gravity stuff going haywire, so there was a lot of cool visual stuff in addition to the way that it was shot for me. So enough to keep me interested in watching. I mean, there wasn't really much at all to think about for me in this movie, and I really didn't feel anything, but the way it was shot, and the visuals, and the world, made it interesting enough for me to stick with it until the end. Okay, so I always try to ask myself, is there anything of worthwhile moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance in this movie or game or whatever I'm doing that might stimulate worthwhile thought or conversation? Nothing really jumped out to me in this movie. You've got the parallel Earth concept, and that's been used mostly in fiction to explore character-driven issues, like choices and regrets and what-if type scenarios, but that wasn't done a ton here, really. It's also been used by some to try and explain the fine-tuning of our universe through purely naturalistic means. Dr. William Lane Craig of ReasonableFaith.org weighs in on why he thinks the multiverse concept is weak and why it fails to replace God as the best explanation for a life-permitting universe to exist. And I'll try to link to a few of those resources below so you can check those out if that interests you. But, that's really reaching on my part to find something thematically that jumped out at me that might be worth thinking or talking about. This isn't much of a thinker or a feeler, as I said. It's just a visually interesting sci-fi action flick in a first-person shooter style. That would be my take on it. I really don't know what your tastes are in movies or what your take on this one would be, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, hey, Pater, rent this one. Just to watch by yourself. Your wife Holly likes Downton Abbey, and she's going to be curious enough about Dan Stevens to be willing to watch it with you, but let her know that she's going to get bored about halfway through and just be a nice wife sitting with you and spending time with you on the couch after that, and you're probably going to get bored a little bit around halfway point too for a while, and then pick it up again with your interest will pick up again a little bit more. Maybe that'll be the caffeine, of your Pepsi, but anyway, you are going to like the way that they shoot the movie, and the visuals are going to be interesting enough in combination with that to make this a useful time killer, but that's probably about it for you. Alright, it's rated R for language and some violence. Those are my thoughts. I'd love to get yours in the comments below. Please consider supporting this channel by becoming a Spirit Blade Insider, which grants you exclusive monthly goodies and behind-the-scenes content. You can get more information about that on our About page over at spiritblade.com, where you can also find our audio dramas and our weekly podcast. So I hope you'll consider checking us out there. And then also, where's my thing? I don't have it. It's gone. Finally, there's a ton more content and community over at christiangeekcentral.com, so I hope you'll join us there as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. Once again this year, Christian Geek Central is participating in Extra Life. This is a charity that raises funds for the Children's Miracle Network of Hospitals, which provides free medical care to children whose families could otherwise not afford it. And this is very often for critical, life-saving treatment. Joining our team only requires a willingness to ask your family and friends to consider donating toward your fundraising efforts. Participants also usually do something fun and game-related to draw attention to their fundraising efforts, like a special game night at your home or your church, or like me, me, you could do a crazy 24-hour video gaming marathon. Now, I'm theming it around video games, but really this event can be themed around any kind of gaming, which includes both video games and tabletop games of any kind. What you do to raise funds is entirely up to you, but I would love for you to consider joining the Christian Geek Central Extra Life team. As team leader, I'll be there to help answer your questions, provide some helpful tips if I can, and just in general be your fundraising cheerleader and try to draw attention myself to your fundraising efforts. You can get more information about the event as a whole at extra-life.org, and if you choose to sign up there, be sure to select Christian Geek Central as your team so I can get in touch with you and then just help in whatever way I can. Fundraising can begin at any time, but our main push is going to be through the month of October leading up to November 4th. That's the annual Extra Life Game Day when I'll be streaming my 24-hour video gaming marathon live and trying to stay awake without throwing up like I almost did last year. More details on my live stream as we get closer to it. That's it for now. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.